Welcome everybody, and can everyone hear me okay, actually?
I can feel good.
The audio is okay? Okay, because I do have a headset on. Okay, I wanted to welcome everybody who's here. It's a little bit dark on my screen because it's still dark out where I am. I'm actually in the state of Tennessee right now, but the sun should be up shortly. And thank you, Yuri and ITA, for hosting my presentation in this awesome conference. You've already seen my little bio, but a little bit about me before we go forward is I'm an attorney and I'm a founder of Online Legal Translations. We work exclusively with qualified attorney translators. And also, if you have questions, if you could please put them in the chat, I will go really fast and try to save some time at the end. And I'll also be posting the slides and all the resources that I talk about in at the end in the chat, and I'm also going to go over and post them on the conference Facebook group for you, and my email will be in there in case anybody has a question and we don't get to you. So I am going to go fast, but don't worry because there'll be time to ask your questions. So today I'm going to talk to you. I'm going to give you some practical advice, some substantive advice, meaning like specific words, phrases, tricky legal writing issues, traps you can fall into, and how to avoid them. And again, I'm going to give you a bunch of resources that will help get you on your way to being the legal client's favorite provider, the go-to translation provider. And I'll be giving you my top 10 favorite legal translation resources and a whole bunch of other things. And you might be asking, well, why is she sharing all these secrets? Because number one, there's definitely enough legal translation work to go around for everybody. So if you're interested in this field, if you're already working in it, you know that globalization's continuing and litigation's increasing. All sorts of things are happening in the world, and everyone needs legal translation. And also, I personally feel that this is really important work, and the public needs to be able to conduct its legal affairs across borders and across languages. And so initially, I mean, especially for everyone to have equal access to legal services, these lawyers need translators and also interpreters to partner with. They need people they can count on. Now, my little disclaimer here is that this is not legal advice. For legal advice, please contact a qualified lawyer in your jurisdiction. Also, I'm going mainly from a US perspective here because I practice in the United States, but a lot of the information here, most of it is applicable in most other places. So I've gone kind of general and not done a US specific talk here. So you might be asking yourself, what's with lawyers? They can be kind of scary to approach. They're some of the most demanding professionals in the world, but why are they so uptight and so stiff? It does help to understand what a lawyer's experiencing when they suddenly realize, oh my gosh, we need a legal translation. They feel panic, they feel pressure, they feel fear, and they have very tight deadlines. In these deadlines, if missed, have really serious consequences. So they're going to impose these deadlines on everyone around them, even if it's due to their own procrastination. And I like to say, when it comes to lawyers, procrastination on their part is really an emergency on your part. However, the good news is that lawyers will pay a lot for a good legal translation. And that's what we're going to talk about a little bit more. But first, I want to go a little deeper in terms of, why these lawyers are so grumpy about their work and dealing with legal translations. Lawyers have all kinds of support staff and vendors who are handling and affecting their documents and their work. And whatever happens to the lawyer's client because of an error related to the lawyer's legal services, such as a translation error, it's ultimately considered by law in most places to be the lawyer's own mistake. So legal clients typically can't, your lawyer clients, they can't typically read both languages involved. So they're really at your mercy and they can't control the situation. And that puts them in a position of stress and fear. So, they're risking their personal reputation or even getting disbarred or struck off if there are some, major mistakes in someone else's work upon which they relied, including translation. They're blindly trusting you with their career. That you need to provide extremely high quality work if they're going to trust you and keep you. And that's why kind of why they're so uptight about others not messing up their stuff. But again, they're willing to pay handsomely for high quality work. And in the handout, I provided some examples of 3 articles illustrating where a simple comma in a legal document led to really disaster. For example, there's a California case where a missing comma in a translation threw out a huge drug bust in a criminal trial. Excuse me. There's a Canadian case where a missing comma literally cost $1 million. Now, we're talking Canadian dollars, but still, it's a lot of money. And there's also a case from the state of Maine where a missing comma resulted in a $10 million loss. So lawyers and their clients have a lot to lose from the mistakes of others. They're pretty uptight, but really with good reason. Excuse me. Now, also, I want to talk to you about, mistakes that you make that could have serious consequences for you as well. In addition to the consequences for lawyers, there are important consequences to you for your own errors. For example, if something you do costs the law firm the loss of a case, their client, money, property, could be the custody of a child, it could be somebody's freedom. Besides damage to your reputation and not getting paid, you can also, as the translator, be held responsible to pay for the financial losses to their client or to the firm. And if you're thinking about, well, we have a pretty good contract, they are legal service providers that you're dealing with, so they would probably win in a dispute, and you could be even held personally liable. Now, I'm not trying to say all this to frighten you guys away from doing legal work. It's great work to do. But I just want you to be aware of the gravity of the situation and why these are tough customers, but they're also really good customers to have. And you can reduce these risks I'm talking about with specific communication styles and by providing high quality translation work that lawyers will feel comfortable with. So let's talk a little bit about how lawyers choose service providers. And here is where you can really take advantage of the little quirks of the way lawyers think. And this is good inside information, I think. Lawyers tend to stick with one provider with whom in everything that they do, whether it's printing or whatever, with whom they are, I would say, acceptably happy or reasonably happy. They really just don't have time to comparison shop and find a new provider. So it's something that they procrastinate about, and they'll stick with whoever they've had for years and years just because that's who they use. The good news is you can jump in there, and if the firm or the customer is unhappy with their current provider, you can present them with a quick and painless solution. You can just reach out to some law firm that or they're local or somehow you have a connection to them and say, hey, who are you using for your translations now, by the way? Or do you ever use translation services? Who are you using? And then you could go even a little bit further and say, are you happy with them? And maybe even a little further or later in a conversation and say, well, what would you improve? And then at that point, you can make them a proposal and say, just give them I would call it a proposal light. Just give them like 3 or 4 points in a list that they can mentally compare to their current provider that makes you their clear choice. Like you might say, well, I do legal translations and 1, 2, 3, 4. So you might say, talk about guaranteeing your work. You might talk about, you could, everybody gets their work proofread before they send it to the customer, I'm sure, but you could frame it as free proofreading. Whatever your unique selling point is, your USP, show that you add value compared to their current provider. And they'll start doing the comparison mentally and say, well, sure, send us a proposal. When you kick it out there, you could even say, who are you using? Are you happy? We do legal translations, and if you'd like, we could send you a proposal. But whatever you do, don't be the cheapest one. Like you notice I didn't mention price in there. You want to be, I think it was Rolls-Royce used to have a commercial in the 80s that said something like, we're reassuringly expensive. So make sure that you are reassuringly expensive. And they have the money to pay. So I'm thinking back, one of my old corporate clients We used to pay $900 an hour for our outside real estate counsel, and our patent counsel was $1,100 an hour plus. And this was over 10 years ago. So believe me, they have budgets. Um, they are high paying clients and they will stick with you. And, um, they'll refer you to their colleagues because they'll talk about it and say, hey, who do you guys use for translation? And they'll tell them and they'll refer them to you. So you'll get, if you provide high quality work and if you communicate to them in a way that's conducive to them to be happy with you, then they'll refer you. And make sure that you charge according to the high quality of your work. Charge extra if the formatting is messed up. Charge extra for rush jobs. The formatting is often messed up in legal documents because they're old and there's no electronic copy. But if you get good at that, then it's not even a problem. So, there are tools that can take care of that. Now, when you're communicating with your lawyers, your lawyer clients, remember who your target client is. Be polished in your social media profiles, maintain a polished image in the website, your LinkedIn page, your Facebook page, your business card, and also with you in person. When you go to meet them, make sure you're on time and everything like that. And I mean, when you meet them, when we can meet people again. And online, make sure you're polished, and especially on the telephone. You need to make sure that you don't have like cats and dogs and kids in your professional profile. And by that, I mean, create separate profiles for personal and business. My two profiles couldn't be more different, my professional and my personal. Also, excuse me, when you're communicating with lawyers, three things. You want to be precise. You want to double check your written communications for spelling and grammatical errors. A lawyer will mentally immediately dismiss you if they see an error, and they will see it right away. If it's at the bottom of your email, they'll see it before they even get there. And be concise. Again, there's a ton of pressure in their world. They're rushing, they work crazy hours and have tight deadlines. Don't make them feel like you're wasting their time or that getting information from you is tedious and difficult. They'll become really annoyed if you don't get straight to the point. So before you send that email or make that telephone call, prepare in advance. One really important tip is use email subject lines that are easy to search and are helpful. For example, you don't want to put, especially if you have multiple translations with them, you don't want to put as your subject line translation. You want to put translation of ABC contract or something like that, ABC contract translations. And lawyers do still usually prefer email over telephone and texting because it's a written record, it's searchable, and they can answer it, on their own time fully. So also one quick note here, you need to make cultural adjustments depending on what countries you're dealing with, of course. But I have found that lawyers the world over are pretty much the same with personality wise and communication wise. So the last section here is talking about being complete. Now you can use bullet points and numbered lists to help you send clear communications, but don't overdo it or it'll just be a big mess of bullets and arrows and things. So briefly explain your issues and offer a solution. I have a little example written down here. The example is, you send them that email with the subject line ABC contract and you say, hello, this is Paige Dygert from Online Legal Translation. I've received the document entitled ABC contract. I have a few questions. Then you go, question number one. There appear to be two different spellings of the plaintiff's name. I followed the source spellings in each instance. Let me know if you want me to change that. So that's where you offer a solution. And then another one might be, there appears to be an item missing on page 3. The numbered list skips number 4. I have left those as is following the source, but I will renumber them if you wish. Again, offer a solution so that they can just tick down your list and write back and say, okay, fine with everything. And don't expect them to be real friendly. They're not jerks if they're like, fine, if that's their whole email. They're just really trying to, solve problems and move on to the next one. So this is probably the most important part of this talk here, is do not practice law. Now, I started translating full time after 20 years in contracts, really mostly contracts, when I switched to translation. And at first, my mind kept automatically going to a legal analysis of everything I was translating. And I'd go along and I'd be translating something and say, oh, they should say reasonable here. And then I have to stop myself and say, whoops. You have to switch that off, and you have to switch that urge off when you're doing translations and just be the translator. I mean, even if you are a lawyer, or especially if you're a lawyer, remember, you are not any of these parties' lawyers in the documents. So you might see several parties or different things going on in the documents, but you might not even know which party your customer, the lawyer, is representing. So if you do that, kind of switch it off and be the translator, it's better, because then you won't kind of unwittingly or subtly try to advocate through your translation, because that would be really bad. The other, along the same lines, is if you find mistakes and, talking about making corrections, if you're going through a document, you might want to feel the urge to correct something. For example, if you see something crazy like the passage of recent laws legalizing crack cocaine in Italy, you might think, what the heck? And that's not right. With such apparent mistakes, just leave it alone. Trust me. Don't question the client's legal writing or their analysis. If you're afraid somehow you're going to be blamed for these mistakes, just make a note for yourself and put it in the file. Obviously, well, maybe not obviously, but this has never happened to me. That's some kind of weird thing I've seen in a document, because I have seen mistakes. No one's ever tried to blame me for it. I'm not surprised. As a lawyer, I would never expect a translator to question my legal analysis or writing. A, it's not their job, and B, it would just be extremely annoying. You don't look to lay people to find your mistakes, even if it were a genuine mistake. So just leave it alone. If it ever happened that somehow somebody blamed you for not alerting them to their own mistake, you can just explain that you noticed it, but it wasn't your place to make legal interpretations. So I'm going to dig even a little deeper into this, because if you do see problems and you want to ask questions, when you have translation questions, if after consulting your resources, you're not absolutely confident in a term that you're planning to use, you can still have, you might still have non-legally substantive questions. And by non-legally substantive, I mean questions about the translation itself. So in addition to being concise, precise, and complete, timing is really important. And as I mentioned before, it's really important to offer a solution with your questions. Even if your solution seems kind of out there, it's really important to always offer something. And also to group your questions. If you send a separate email every time you have a question, you are going to make them hate you. Instead, make them love you and show respect for their time. So this is going into, well, what do you do? When do you ask a question? I've been doing translations for quite a while now, and rarely is there a question that I have that you cannot proceed without the answer. I mean, it might be, do you want this? You told me 4 documents, there's one more. Do you want me to do that one too? That's a question you really can't move forward without answering. But try to save them to the end, unless the project's really, really long. Try to save them to the end and send the questions with the delivery of the document, excuse me, and with enough time left over to make the changes that they might agree to. Finishing early is always a good idea anyway with legal translations, and I generally finish a day or 2 early, building in a cushion for emergencies. So that's part of my advice about talking to lawyers and how to effectively communicate with them. But let's talk a little bit more about some substantive things. Some red flags of non-lawyer writing in legal documents. We're going into, why you need to have certain legal writing training to effectively translate a legal document. Now, we lawyers can spot attempts at legal writing by a non-lawyer from a mile away. I just had a contract the other day from someone I was going to hire to do something for my business. And it's a really, really big company, way bigger than mine. But their standard contract, I could tell right away that they had initially started with a contract written by a lawyer, but they had made changes of their own. And I could see exactly where the non-lawyer was writing. And in the end, I actually decided not to do business with them because even though they were a really big company and supposedly one of the best in the business, it made them, it hurt their credibility with me. And I thought, why wouldn't they spend, a couple $100 to have this revised when, um, just the document was probably unenforceable. So I'm looking for a different provider now. So anyway, we can tell exactly where the non-lawyer worked on a legal document. And there are dead giveaways. I mean, even with someone who has familiarity with a particular type of legal document, like a real estate agent or something like that, just like when when a non-native speaker is trying to translate into a foreign language, even if they're really, really, really good, you can spot things. So when I'm asked to edit a legal translation, or when I'm editing one, I can spot a translation done by a non-legal specialist a mile away, because there are so many opportunities to mess it up. Um, you know, People who are not well trained in legalese, the language of lawyers, they often try to translate legal expressions into everyday language, and legal writing just can't afford such errors. So don't try to fake it. At the other end of your email, there's not some 21-year-old project manager fresh out of university in a boiler room agency. So you're not going to be able to pull the wool over their eyes. Lawyers are intelligent, analytical professionals. They have a vested interest in these documents, and you can show them that you are also an intelligent, analytical professional with high quality work and using the proper language in your translations. They will trust you and hire you in the future, even if you're costly or if your costs go up. If they have someone they can rely on, they'll stick with you. So a couple more things. Words that we know can mean something else in a legal document. It's kind of similar to false friends. Legalese has some false friends with its parent language. For example, in English, the word aggravated really just means like really annoyed and angry. And we always hear about aggravated assault, on television or in the news. And, you think, oh, well, that person assaulted the other person because they aggravated them, but it doesn't mean that. I also hear misuse of a lot of legal terms by non-lawyers, certainly in the news these days, but also things people will say, my house was robbed, but they really mean their house was burglarized, and the difference is huge. Also, people will say their job was a hostile environment. Every time your boss is a jerk, that's not necessarily a hostile environment under the laws in the United States that protect you from that. So also a clear sign that a translator is not really a legal specialist is they mix up the words can and may, and those are really, really important. However, again, I'm not trying to scare you away from doing this work. I'm trying to kind of hold your hand through the valley of death here. With training and time, a legal translation specialist, they won't make those mistakes. So another example is don't use terms or words that you don't know. So don't throw around these legal terms unless you're 100% sure of what they mean in legalese. So what to do? When you come across one, you stop and you find out what it means. You get comfortable with it, comfortable enough so that you could explain it to another person. Now, in the handout that I'm going to post in the chat, there is a link to this American guy, Adams on Contracts. If you don't already know about him, he provides really good, understandable explanations of certain legal phrases and concepts. And learning legalese, it's really all about conceptual ideas. You have to get your head around what they're talking about. It's not just look it up in Black's Law Dictionary, because everything is dependent on something else. Every concept is dependent on another concept. But this guy, Adams on Contracts, he's really good. Now, he, in my personal opinion, he tries to oversimplify things, but I still think he's a great authority to look at. And of course, you want to collect and use your own reputable sources. If you want to look at really, really, really proper legal writing, I would look at law journals like the University of whatever law journal for each country and specialty. Those are examples of proper usage of legal terms in writing because they're probably the most strict, more strict than court documents really of how to write properly legal writing. And again, there's really no excuse not to research before you move forward with something with the advent of the internet. I mean, I could go back and say, oh, when I was in law school, we had to use actual books made out of paper, but there really is no room for laziness in a legal translation. So set yourself apart from the others by being thorough, and you will become the favorite translator of your legal clients. If they feel they can trust you, you're golden. Now, another important thing is don't completely trust your spell checkers or your translation memories. Microsoft Word spell checker is okay. It's a good place to start in Legalese. But with Word, the spell checker is not fail-safe, excuse me, because it marks a lot of things wrong that are not wrong in the legal word, like the word please, P-L-E-A-S, like the multiples please. And also translation memories. That looks really, they look at the number of letters in a segment, which are the same as another segment, and they'll mark it, 99% or whatever. So for example, there's a huge legal difference between within 90 days of and within 90 days from. Those are hugely different. However, in a translation memory, it might mark it a 99% match, or if it's a really, really big segment, it might even mark it 100%, depending on the software. But for the client, the difference between 90 days of and 90 days from could mean millions of dollars. It could mean 90 more days in prison. So you don't want to make that mistake. So use these features and apps with caution and don't trust them 100%, but just use them as your starting point or almost like another set of eyes on your work. And again, if something looks funny, either when using these tools or when you're looking over your work, trust your instincts and make sure you research until you're really 100% confident. Now, I want to talk a little bit about how Legalese is a sublanguage within whatever languages you're using. It's extremely rigid and inflexible with very little room for creativity, flexibility, and interpretation and style, which doesn't sound nice. However, once you become comfortable with standardized legal language, you're going to be able to work much faster than ordinary documents because you're going to spot irregularities so quickly. You're going to anticipate what it's supposed to say because there's really only one or two or three ways to say something. It's not as easy to master as other language subsets, such as like UK English versus US English, which is kind of like something you could have a checklist for. But the process is similar to gaining a nice working knowledge of it. It's also not easy, but I know that every good translator that is interested in this field can do it. A skilled legal translator can handle enough legalese in their mother tongue, and to a lesser extent in their source languages. And if you're just starting out, you can handle learning this. Now, remember, guys, you don't have to argue the cases or negotiate the contracts or advise a client. So, I'm describing this as difficult, but you just have to have a really in-depth knowledge and contextual understanding of the words being used in the document and apply them. So obtaining a professional level of skill in legal writing and in legal translation is totally doable. It's not easy and it's not super quick, but it's possible. And the rewards are definitely worth it. I mean, who doesn't want to receive documents that are by and large really well written? You're not receiving documents that are a mess to begin with. Lawyers are pretty good writers, so all of your documents are going to be easy to translate in that respect. And the work is very interesting and it's highly paid, and you'll get real loyalty from your clients. Just checking the time here. Okay, we're doing fine. So there are also subsets of legalese, which it starts to get kind of scary, but for example, with whatever languages you're using, there are things like real estate, and you can learn all about real estate in your source and target languages. There are patents. Patents are fascinating, and insurance. In the legal world, I worked in insurance a lot, and then when I started translating, it kind of surprised me the difference between the language of insurance in American English and UK English. They're very, very, very different. I have a nice little cheat sheet in the handout that addresses that very specific issue, but I put it in there to give you an idea of the things that you need to look out for when you are dealing with two different languages, um, subsets of legalese in each language. So you really need to be organized and get your head around it before you proceed. So you'll need lots of resources and glossaries and real life examples to be able to move forward. And in the handout, I do include, besides that those insurance terms, some other really good things to help you through, and also to get you started on the kinds of resources that are helpful. So let's talk a little bit about patents. They are very, very specialized. If you're a technical person, this might appeal to you. I work in patents a lot. Some of them I don't, if I'm working on it personally, I don't accept it because it could be overly technical. But I find, even though I'm sort of more of an arts and sciences person, as long as the patent is about something tangible that I could, visualize, it can be a lot of fun. But patent language is a language within a language within a language, and they toss readability and style completely out the window in favor of technical and legal precision. So just as an example, I took some language out of a patent I worked on recently that I wanted to share with you guys. Here it is. Quote, as stated, the at least one of the at least one first portion 2 and or the at least one section portion 3 and or the at least 1/3 portion 4 can be produced from a material 1 of mainly elastic behavior. Now, in the context of that, it made perfect sense, but it sounds bizarre now. So, you're going to have to learn these subsets of legalese. Now, a couple of really specific writing practices that you might want to adopt are make a note of things that repeatedly differ between your source and target language. And these are just little things. For example, when you're writing a number out in a contract, days or money or something like that, numbers in United States English legal documents, especially contracts, they'll put the digits in parentheses after the number is written out. But in other languages and in other types of English, they sometimes put the words like 129 in parentheses, and the digits are part of the text. So make sure you know things like that. And other things I probably shouldn't have to mention, but I see them too many times not to, are, again, learn how to write out numbers in your target language. They're not always the same. Just the other day, I received something that said 365 days. And I just was like, it's 365. This is basic writing stuff, but most people in their everyday writing are not that precise. But again, that and just jumped out at me as a lawyer, and I was like, oh, what a mess. And make sure that you know how to use hyphens, semicolons, and all punctuation perfectly in your target language. How to write out dates, indicate currency, temperature, everything, of course, in both your working languages. Know the official geographical abbreviations in your target language. This stuff sounds really 8th grade or whatever, or primary school, but a regular person, a human being, will overlook these errors. But when a lawyer sees these errors, it will strike fear into them, and they'll think, oh my God, what else is wrong? If they can't even write, if they write 365 instead of 365, if they don't know that, what else did they mess up? However, if you do provide really good translations and they're high quality and you communicate with them succinctly, they will notice it, they'll appreciate it, and they'll value the peace of mind it gives them, and they will pay for it. A couple other things I want to talk about is acronyms, just briefly. Um, don't use acronyms in communications or your work unless you know what the letters stand for. In the handout, there's a link to my favorite acronym finder, and it includes multiple languages. You should have several of these saved um, in your resources. Another thing is legal citations. I've put up here on the screen the Brown versus Board of Education case, and the citation is the part beginning with the comma. And this is when a legal writer mentions a legal authority, it's indicating the source. And the source of that is, the first number is a volume of a book. The second number is the page that the case starts on, and the third number is where the quote came from. Legal citations, honestly, were my biggest nemesis in law school. It seems like a little thing, but this was the hardest part for me. So make sure that you're doing your citations correctly for your countries. Also in the handout, there's a really nice international legal citation guide. It's put out by NYU School of Law, and it's an older edition. You have to pay for the new one, but it's a good place to start. So also don't be afraid to ask your client their preferences on translating citations. Again, that's a translation question, not a legal question. Do they want you to write it out? Do they want you to abbreviate in the target language and then just be consistent? Do they want you to leave them in the source language? So check that if there are a lot of citations in your document. Also, another thing that you might want to do is develop a checklist comparing legal systems and legal terms in the languages in which you work. There's another resource in the handout. It's the ECLI, the European Case Law Identifier, but it has more than just case law in it. It's really good. Foreign words. This is kind of funny to talk about foreign words with translators, but in English legalese, they use a lot of Latin terms. Italian legalese uses a lot of French terms. So understand what these are and how they are cited. In English, they just put them in italics. In US English, excuse me, and find out, how they're used in your working languages, and make sure that you don't get those wrong and don't translate them. There's some legal concepts that you actually really have to know backward and forward if you're going to be able to work in this area. So I would pick kind of a niche and start with that. It can be done a little bit at a time. I would just pick something interesting like, I don't know, double jeopardy, and see how it's handled in each of your language countries. And you'll learn more than just that topic as you go. In the handout, I like contracts, so in the handout, I've included at least a list of 21 contractual concepts that you should know. If you get good at this, you'll make the client think of you first, and they will always call you. Also, in the line of contracts in the handout, I just wanted to mention, I put some references and articles that can kind of get you started and going on those 21 concepts, but it is really just a list, so it's up to you to get familiar with them. Now, also, you might be asking, okay, besides this really quick presentation, how can I gain and improve my skills? You should identify and take training opportunities with reputable providers. I would recommend that you look for what I call free CLE. And CLE is continuing legal education classes, excuse me. And you can find free ones all over the internet. And they're pretty good because they have to be approved by the states in which people are licensed. So, they're continuing legal education classes aimed at lawyers, but just find them in your area of interest. And a lot of them are really basic because they're aimed at new lawyers. You might find one that's called I don't know, Negotiating Contracts 101 or something, and that's a great place to get started. A good translator will have an extremely high level of mastery of their native language, of course, and legalese is no different. You have to master legalese in your native language before you can begin to understand it and translate into legalese in other languages. Now, a good idea is to get yourself a lawyer mentor, a person that you can ask things if something looks strange or if you just don't know. And I don't mean your friend, the paralegal, or your cousin, you know, respect their time, find somebody, and you can even offer to translate something on their website or a document in exchange for helping you. I want to talk a little bit about confidentiality. You know, you're going to see really interesting stuff, really juicy stuff, maybe about celebrities or pending mergers, but you cannot discuss your work with anyone because you will be held personally responsible for losses stemming from a breach in confidentiality. Now, we're almost there. Thank you for sticking with me, guys. I just want to summarize here that the things that we've touched upon today is make sure that there's no red flags in your work. Make sure you provide high quality, excellent translations, and be really, really professional and succinct and reliable and responsive in your communications. I'm providing you guys with some resources. Here is the link, and also there's a copy of the slides I'm gonna provide. And lastly, if you want to email me, you can email me at Paige@Online Legal Translations. If you have any questions, I'll try to help you or point you in the right direction. Again, it's just Paige, Paige, @Online Legal Translations, and I'm happy to help you at any time. So I am going to stop sharing, and I'm going to get, oh, goody questions.
I would like to sort of take your point one further. I went to law school for a year in 1985, which is a few years ago. And I've been translating contracts for 16 years, and I always thought I knew what I was doing, but I always had this doubt because, well, you know, it was a long time ago. I'm paying to take a course writing contracts. And in terms of confidence, it's incredible to take a paid course with regular law students. And if you're taking one course, it's not a heavy load, but it allows you to feel confident in what you're translating and what it really means, instead of thinking let's say, being fairly sure you understand.
Right, being like, oh, I think, yeah, feels pretty good. Yeah, it's reassuring, right?
It's reassuring to know that I really do understand. And there's certain things I did not know about. Now I understand a little bit more. And I think it's a really good investment of money, as much as anything, to actually take not just a CLE, but an actual course. They're not that expensive. I mean, they're...
Right. I think educating yourself, if anything, it's reassuring. I'm going to look up here at the questions and see what we've got. Oh, we only have a couple minutes. Okay, here's the slides. Yeah, they do feel panic all the time. Could you please share the handout? Yep. Here's the links. Okay. Yes, I understand there are different types of, I'm talking to Janet, hi. There are different types of education in the US, in the US and other countries. In fact, I wrote a blog post about that. If you want to look on my blog, about the different types of education required to become a lawyer in different countries. Yeah, and then Naomi says, quality varies a lot. Some lawyers write really well and others far less. Well, of course, I suppose so, but usually they're better than average. Michael, I wondered if you could notice the sun coming up. Michael said, Paige, thanks for a clear and informative presentation, and thank you for getting up so early for us. It's fun to see the light increase during your talk. Yeah, the sun's fully out now. So does anybody else have any, oh, good. Stephen says any recommendation of paid, Carrie says to Stephen, any recommendation of paid courses? I mean, they're out there. I just make sure they're reputable.
There is a university in California which was online even before the corona. And I assume there are other places which are online even that are, they're not improvising. They're actually doing fairly well. It's just a matter of which courses they'll allow non-law students to take.
Right.
Which is the, if you've done, as it is, because I had first year of law school, I could take the courses I want to. They don't allow, they don't allow someone with no legal background to take a second year course.
Right. But you can also find them for like undergraduate courses or even specifically legal. I mean, I would even recommend something that's out there for paralegals or something like that. You know, it's going to get your head around the concepts and, you know, help you to understand what you're reading. And also, again, like you said, Stephen, be reassuring that, oh, okay, I actually do understand that. Are we out of time, Yuri?
Paige, what's your language pair?
Yeah.
For me personally, I do Spanish and Italian to English.
Okay.
Yeah.
Another thing I wanted to ask you was, don't you find sometimes you develop a relationship with clients and they actually do appreciate when you correct them? I mean, I'm a lawyer and I specialize in legal translation. I have a legal translation firm and I employ lawyers like you do. And with at least most of our clients, they really appreciate it because, especially in very long documents, I mean, obviously they're going to make errors and they appreciate that we point them out, especially if it hasn't been filed yet. Obviously, if it has been filed or it's coming from the opposing party, then, you know, we're not going to say anything. But if they haven't filed it yet and they can still make corrections, then why not?
My philosophy is just be the translator. I mean, I disagree completely and respectfully that it's, you know, it's not your job as a translator, but that's okay.
What about the famous buyer-seller confusion?
Yeah, just one moment, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
And Paige was asking out of time. Officially, we're out of time, but we have a 10-minute now. So if you want to stay around and chat, that's fine.
I'm happy to stay. Yep.
You're welcome to stick around until the end of the day, of course.
Yes.
Absolutely. And so the next talk is now it's 2:30 p.m. in Israel, and the next talk is in 2:40 p.m.
So we have a couple minutes. Okay.
Yeah, so we have about 10 minutes to next talk. So just I'm offline. I'm going to use to close my camera and mic for 10 minutes, and then I'll come back. And
okay.
Here's always here.
Kick us out.
Paige, I'm sorry, is my camera?
I do follow you, Stephen. It's
very
so
good.
nice
What I'm
to
just
meet
saying
you
is,
in person.
what about these agreements where they get the buyer and the seller mixed up somewhere on page 7, and you as a translator realize that this makes no the text in front of you makes no sense. So I put the infamous sick in because, again, I'm supposed to translate the source no matter if there's a mistake, but I don't really want to be. I want them to know it's not my mistake; it's the drafter's mistake on.
Oh no,
that
I wouldn't.
And talk to the lawyer.
That's up to you, but I would not.
Lawyer.
Yeah, I would. What I would do is translate it as is and add a note and submit a note with it. I mean, I've received. Oh my gosh, I received a series of contracts to translate once, and it was all these boy bands in Central
Blame
America.
it on the cut and paste.
And yeah, exactly. And I would, I just translated them as is because, you know, that mistake could be the crux of their case. It might not be, you might be translating something from the other side. It's not your job to figure all that out. You know, you just translate it. And if you see something and you really feel it's so important that you need to point it out, you could add it as a note when you turn it in. But I wouldn't go there because it's just going to annoy them.
I worked in-house. I would run down to I would take the paper and run over to the lawyer who gave it to me and said, what should I do? and after the third time I brought him something, and it must have been like a 30-40 page document, someplace around page 10, he submitted an amendment to the court, fixing his, you know, what he'd submitted. And then I came back, you know, the next day with something. He said, couldn't you bring me everything all at once?
Yeah, exactly. That's like I was talking about. Yeah, don't piecemeal, or they'll be like, argh, you know. And I know it's tempting because it makes people feel clever when they find somebody else's mistake, but just translate.
Yeah, but I was in-house. The
Right, so you could just walk over. Yeah,
so,
yeah.
It's a different story.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing, my other experience I had was where a client paid me in advance, and I was very happy he did, and it described child abuse by an ultra-Orthodox in London. and very painful material.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a very unpleasant individual based on this court document. And I had to translate the court decision. That was my job to do it. And I really didn't read the document, but the more I read the document, the more I disliked the person. And I said, okay, at least I don't have to worry about being cheated. He paid me, you know.
Yeah, oh yeah. I have one case, and I don't know why they sent me pictures, but for some reason it was a murder in Texas, and for some reason they sent me photos. Nothing gory, but I won't forget how sad it was. You know, I don't do a lot of criminal stuff. Most of my stuff is business, but it's when we all have those ones that we remember, and they really, really touch us, and you know,
Painful to translate.
Yes, but we're doing a service. You know, the victims are being more fully represented if everything is in both languages, I think.
I agree, but there's a certain aspect where you're reading it. This is really this is not distant. This is something humanly unpleasant description of the behavior of this person. You know.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it can be really bad. Luckily, I don't deal with that many, but a lot of my interpreter friends deal in refugee and asylum cases, and they can come back from work really upset.
Yeah, you can't cut yourself off from that. You know, because you're reading the case.
Yep, it's so sad. It can be.
I like to ask a specific question.
Oh, sure.
How do you reach decision makers in legal firms?
Well, I'm really lucky because I practiced for 20 years in the U.S. in-house, so I knew a lot of in-house and outside counsel.
Okay.
And I worked mostly in the Miami area, but I worked for companies like Bacardi and Perry Ellis and a couple of startups, and I knew them. However, I think the way to get to them is I'm all about LinkedIn. Facebook isn't really where to find them.
Yeah.
And go to LinkedIn, and
I'm very active in LinkedIn.
yeah, and find, yeah, I see you there a lot. And
Guilty.
I'm one of your groupies, actually.
Oh, okay.
And you know, find them. I think there, enter a conversation, and just like I said, the easiest way is like, hey, do you guys use legal translation? Are you happy with your current provider? I'd be happy to provide a quote. If not, and then get into the rest of your conversation. You know, kind of very nice, salesy, unsalesy thing to tell them. And if the thing is, if they just ignore that, they might make a mental note, and somebody else might need you, and they'll say, hey, no, but I know this guy, Stephen Rifkin, and he might be able to help you. So, you know, it's a long game. It's definitely a long game. And also, I would provide, you know, you can post things that are useful to them as your potential client, and maybe send it to them and say, hey, I thought you might like this article, or what do you think about this if you have time, you know, that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's been my frustration from day one is reaching lawyers. I've been without having a huge advertising budget, which is another story.
Yeah.
It's been the one thing which, again, I have an MBA, so I do understand a little bit about marketing. I'm not a genius, but I do understand a little bit about marketing. And I confess that I completely failed in this matter. And I find it frustrating because I keep on trying to think, okay, how do you reach them? Now, the best thing would be go to an American Legal Association meeting and have a booth there. Excuse me, who has $10,000, $20,000? I don't know what that costs to have a table at one of those conventions is like, but.
Yeah, it can be tough. But also, a lot of times the person who makes the decision is not necessarily maybe the general counsel. It might be the office manager. If it's a law firm, it'll be the office manager. It might be the assistant to the general counsel that's, you know, deciding which translation company they're going to use. So that's often what I found. I just talked to my old friends, which was a nice transition. But
best way to do it.
Yay, the kitty's in the picture. Okay, what's his name? What's Kitty's name? Yeah.
This one? Oh, this is Soof. He's our social cat.
Yeah, very.
And we have another cat who was called Minnie Mouse, but she's twice his weight because she was very tiny as a baby, and she's the unsocial cat.
Aw. So does anybody else have any questions? I think we have like a half a minute left. And okay, so since we have like a second, I just wanted to say, those of you out there who are lawyer translators, we are always looking for help. So let me know.
If you, I'll either send, if chance, or I'll send you an email, and maybe we can contact through that way.
Great, great. I put the links in the
Yeah,
chat.
I pulled that down there.
Awesome. And everybody, I'm going to post it on the Facebook page. So I think our time is up, but thank you,
Thanks.
everybody.
Yep.
It was really nice talking to all of you.